I kept living like I was still blind, even though I could finally see again. Every morning I would move slowly, pretend to search for things, and let Mark guide me like before. Inside, I was shaking. The world looked different now, and so did he. There were expensive things in the house that I didn't remember owning. A golden watch on his wrist, a new perfume scent that wasn't mine, and clothes that looked exactly like Rachel's style hanging in the guest room. I wanted to believe there was an innocent reason. Maybe they had changed things around for me, maybe she left her things here by mistake. But one night, when I heard their laughter in the living room, my heart told me the truth before my eyes did. I walked in quietly, using the same slow steps I used when I couldn't see. Mark's hand rested on Rachel's knee. They looked like they forgot I even existed. I stood there for a few seconds before Rachel noticed me. Her smile disappeared, and she moved away fast. Mark acted like nothing happened. He just said, "Hey, Em, we were just talking about dinner." I nodded and went back to my room, my whole body trembling. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how blind I had been even when I couldn't see. The next morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to tell them anything. I wanted to see how far they would go. I watched everything, how Mark left early and came back late, how Rachel's visits became more frequent, how their smiles faded when I entered the room. I learned to listen, not just with my ears, but with my heart. Days turned into weeks. I found hidden things, letters signed, a bank statement with Rachel's name, and lies in every corner of my home. They had built a secret life behind my blindness. I was supposed to be the helpless one, but now they were the ones who couldn't see what was coming. I started planning quietly. I recorded their conversations. I saved every little piece of proof. And one night, I heard Mark say the words that ended every bit of love I had left: "Once she's gone, it's all ours." I decided that was the night he'd lose everything. I cooked dinner, poured wine, and smiled as if nothing had changed. When we sat down, I looked right into his eyes and said, "It's strange, seeing again after all these years." The color drained from his face. I played the recording right there. Rachel stood up and ran out. Mark tried to speak, but I didn't want to hear anything. I had already heard enough. The next morning, I left. No goodbye, no tears. I filed for divorce, gave away the house, and started over in a quiet town near the ocean. Now, when I wake up and watch the sunrise, I finally understand what it means to see, not just with my eyes, but with the truth. I woke up the next morning pretending everything was normal. Mark brought me breakfast and kissed my forehead like always, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Every touch from him made me sick inside, yet I kept my face calm. I had decided to stay quiet and act blind until I knew everything. I wanted to see what kind of man he really was when he thought I couldn't see him. During the next few days, I began to notice small things that confirmed my fears. Rachel came over more often, always dressed up, smelling like she was going on a date. She cleaned the kitchen, cooked dinner, and even used my favorite mug as if it was hers. Mark would smile at her, the same smile he used to give me years ago. Sometimes, they whispered when they thought I was sleeping. I could hear the way their voices changed, soft, warm, secretive. Every time I heard her laugh, something inside me broke a little more. I started to test them. I left small things moved around the house to see if they would notice. They never did. I could see everything: how Mark would watch Rachel walk away, how she'd touch his shoulder like she owned him. I acted blind, but inside I was wide awake. I knew I needed proof before doing anything, so I waited. One afternoon, when Mark went out, I searched his office. My hands shook, but I kept going. I found a drawer with a key hidden behind a photo frame. Inside, there were papers, bank statements, messages, and a letter. The letter was from Rachel, written months ago. She wrote about how their plan was working, how soon everything would be theirs. My stomach turned. The man I loved had been lying to me, stealing from me, and planning a future with my best friend. I didn't cry. I felt cold, quiet, and calm. I took pictures of everything and put them back exactly where I found them. That night, when Mark came home, I acted like nothing happened. He told me he was tired and had to work late again tomorrow. I smiled and said I understood. Inside, I was planning my next move. The next few weeks, I kept collecting proof. Every time Rachel came, I recorded their conversations using the little device she had once given me, for safety. The irony made me want to laugh. They talked about my money, about how I depended on them, about how much easier life would be once I was gone. I kept every word. I started sleeping less, not out of fear but out of focus. I knew I had to be patient. One wrong move and they would know I could see. So I waited for the right moment, building my quiet revenge day by day. When Mark looked at me, thinking I was helpless, I wanted to scream. But I just smiled and said, "I'm lucky to have you." He had no idea how close he was to losing everything. The days after that were heavy and quiet. I lived in the same house with Mark, acting blind, but inside I felt like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't look at him without remembering every lie he told me. Rachel still came often, pretending to be my friend, but I saw through every fake smile. I stopped trying to understand why they did it. I only wanted to know how far they would go. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Mark began locking his phone, keeping his laptop close, and hiding papers in his briefcase. He thought I couldn't see any of it. Sometimes, he would leave in the middle of the night, saying he had urgent calls. I knew exactly where he was going. Rachel would show up the next day wearing a different perfume and looking tired. I didn't need proof to know what was happening, but I wanted it anyway. I checked the drawers and cabinets when they weren't home. I found unpaid hospital bills even though Mark told me they were handled. I found bank documents that showed money missing from my account. Every page made me feel smaller, weaker, but I kept going. Then I found the last piece, papers showing a shared account between Mark and Rachel. That was all I needed to understand that this wasn't just cheating. It was a plan. I realized they wanted everything. The house, the money, and even my parents' remaining property that was under my name. They wanted me gone completely. I felt sick, but I stayed calm. They believed I was too blind to notice anything, too dependent to fight back. That lie was my only weapon, and I was going to use it. I began preparing quietly. I took pictures of every document I found and sent them to my cousin Daniel, pretending it was just random paperwork. I asked him to keep them safe without explaining why. I also started recording conversations in the house, leaving my phone nearby while pretending to rest. Every word they said became another piece of evidence. One evening, while they sat in the living room talking softly, I caught something that confirmed everything. Mark said, "Just a few more weeks and we'll be free." Rachel replied, "She trusts you completely. She'll never know." I sat in my room, listening, my hands shaking but my mind clear. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't cry again. I made an appointment with a lawyer the next day under a different name. I wore sunglasses and a scarf to make sure no one recognized me. I asked about property transfers, wills, and safety measures. When I left the office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. Back home, I acted the same. I let Mark feed me lies and Rachel pretend to care. But inside, everything had changed. I wasn't their blind victim anymore. I was watching, waiting, and planning to take back everything they thought I couldn't see. Each day felt longer than the one before. I continued my act, blind and harmless, while the truth around me grew darker. I kept my distance, speaking less and watching more. Mark still played the loving husband, but his patience was thinner now. I noticed how easily he got angry, how cold his voice had become. Rachel still came by pretending to help me, but her tone was sharper too. She no longer treated me like a friend, only like a duty she wanted to finish. I spent my time preparing quietly. I checked my savings again, but more money was missing. Mark had full control of our accounts. I didn't argue or ask questions. I just kept saving every small piece of proof I could find. When he left for work, I used the time to move things around and test if he noticed. He never did. He had no idea how much I knew. A few days later, I went through the storage room and found a box filled with things that weren't mine. There were receipts for hotels, expensive dinners, and jewelry I never received. I took pictures of everything. I wanted him to pay for every lie, every secret moment he shared with her while I sat alone thinking he was helping me. That night, Mark told me he would be gone for 2 days on another business trip. I said nothing. When he left, I called Daniel again and told him to keep all the documents safe. I still didn't tell him what was going on. I needed to finish this on my own. Later that night, Rachel showed up even though she wasn't supposed to. She used her spare key and walked in quietly, thinking I was asleep. I heard her voice whispering on the phone, talking to Mark. "Don't worry, she has no idea. Just a few more days." I stayed still, listening, my eyes open in the dark. After she left, I sat on the floor and took a deep breath. I was angry, but I also felt free. I finally knew everything I needed to know. I had enough proof to destroy them both, but I didn't want to rush. They had spent years fooling me, I could spend a few more days fooling them. I planned every step carefully. I arranged another meeting with the lawyer, this time signing a paper to move my property into Daniel's name temporarily. I didn't explain why, only said it was for safety. The lawyer looked surprised, but I smiled and said, "It's just precaution." When I came back home, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset through my sunglasses. It had been 5 years since I'd last seen one. The world looked peaceful, but inside me, a storm was waiting. They thought they controlled everything, but soon they would realize they were the ones trapped. I wasn't the blind woman anymore. I was the silence before their downfall. I stopped pretending out of weakness and started pretending so I could learn. I needed facts, not feelings, and I worked quietly to collect them. I kept smiling while I recorded their voices when they thought the house was empty. Small sounds, the way Mark cleared his throat, Rachel's nervous laugh, I captured it all. The device was tiny, the kind Rachel had given me once for safety. She never guessed I'd turn it against them. I used what I saw to plan carefully. I met with a lawyer under a different name and heard what options I had. The lawyer told me how to protect myself and how to make evidence count. I made copies of emails and saved screenshots on a thumb drive I kept hidden in my sock drawer. I sent those copies to Daniel, my cousin, and told him to hold onto them without explaining why. He agreed, worried and quiet, and made me feel less alone. When I felt ready, I began to set small traps. I would ask Mark about money in front of him and use simple questions to make him reveal more than he intended. I left receipts on the table where Rachel would see them and watched how she reacted. I changed my routine so they could not predict me. They kept revealing themselves by being careless, and every careless moment turned into another piece of proof. The night I chose for confrontation I practiced my voice so it would stay steady. I cooked a meal and set the table like I always had, then poured wine for everyone. I wanted them to be comfortable and confident so their true colors would show. When Mark and Rachel arrived, I acted warm and forgiving. I told jokes and touched his arm the way I used to. They relaxed. That was my chance. After dessert I stood up slowly and said, "There is something I need to tell you." I spoke plainly about my recovery and how I had been feeling safer lately. Then I played the recordings. The room went still. Glass shattered on the floor when Rachel moved. Mark's face changed from calm to stunned. I let the clips play, one after another, and their words filled the quiet house. Mark tried to explain, to say it was a mistake, that he had been lonely. I let him talk and made notes in my head instead of answering. When he finished, I told him I had taken steps to protect my life. I had transferred ownership of some things to Daniel and met a lawyer who knew exactly what to do next. I was not looking for sympathy. I wanted resolution. I left the house the next morning. No shouting, no bargaining. I signed the papers and walked away with the few things I owned. Months later I found a rental by the sea. I painted again and learned to trust myself. The ocean helped me breathe. I still remembered the hurt, but it no longer ruled me. I could finally see the future clearly, and it felt like sunrise. I kept calm after that night. Mark and Rachel didn't know what to do, so they both stayed away for a few days. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet. I didn't miss them. I used that time to talk with my lawyer and move forward with everything I had planned. I gave him the recordings, copies of the papers, and the photos I had taken. He told me I had more than enough to protect myself and end the marriage completely. Hearing that made me feel lighter, like I could finally breathe again. When Mark came back, he looked nervous. He brought flowers and tried to act as if nothing had happened. He spoke softly, said he was sorry, and told me he wanted to fix things. I didn't argue or shout. I just listened. Every word sounded like another lie. I told him I needed time to think, and he believed me. He left again that evening, and I felt relief wash over me. I didn't want revenge anymore. I just wanted peace. A few days later, Rachel came by one last time. She stood at the door, pretending to care, but her eyes looked angry. She asked if we could talk. I let her in and listened quietly as she said she never meant for things to go this far. She said she loved Mark but didn't want to ruin my life. I stayed silent until she finished, then simply said, "You already did." She didn't know what to say after that. She walked out without another word, and I knew that was the last time I would ever see her. I focused on ending things the right way. The lawyer handled the divorce papers, and I didn't have to face Mark again. Everything that was mine stayed with me, and everything that tied me to him was gone. When I signed the final paper, I didn't cry. I just felt done. It was like stepping out of a dark room into open air. After the divorce, I sold the house. I didn't want to stay anywhere that reminded me of the lies. I packed only what mattered: some clothes, old photos of my parents, and my paints. I left everything else behind. I moved to a smaller place near the coast. The first night there, I sat outside listening to the waves. For the first time in years, the silence felt peaceful, not empty. Each day after that, I felt more like myself. I started painting again, just simple things: the ocean, the sky, small flowers outside my window. I didn't think about Mark or Rachel anymore. They became part of a life that didn't belong to me now. Sometimes when I look at the water, I remember how long I pretended not to see. But I don't feel bitter. I feel thankful that I can finally open my eyes and live without fear. The world looks brighter when you stop looking through lies. The evening of the dinner came quietly. I set the table myself and made everything look perfect. I cooked Mark's favorite meal and even opened a bottle of wine that had been sitting in the cabinet for years. I wanted everything to feel calm, normal, almost happy. I needed them both to believe I had forgiven them. When Mark came home, he looked surprised to see the candles and food. He asked what the occasion was, and I just smiled and said I wanted to thank him and Rachel for being there for me all these years. Rachel arrived a few minutes later, pretending to be cheerful. She hugged me as if nothing had ever happened, but her hands trembled slightly. I could see the guilt behind her fake smile. We sat together and started eating. The air in the room felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for something. I kept my voice light, told a few small jokes, and poured more wine into their glasses. The more relaxed they became, the calmer I felt. When dinner ended, I stood up slowly and looked at both of them. My heart was steady. I said, "You've both done so much for me, and I've been thinking about how lucky I am." They smiled, thinking everything was fine. Then I added softly, "It's strange seeing everything again after so long." The moment the words left my mouth, Rachel froze. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Mark stared at me, his face pale, his lips parting but no words coming out. I reached for my phone and pressed play. Their voices filled the room. Every lie, every plan, every cruel word echoed in that small space. They both looked trapped, like there was nowhere left to hide. Rachel tried to stand up, but her legs shook. Mark said my name again and again, but I didn't answer. I just listened. I wanted them to hear what I had heard for weeks. When the recordings ended, I finally looked at Mark and said, "You made me live in darkness even when I could see." That's something I'll never forget. He tried to apologize, but the words sounded empty. Rachel started crying, saying she never meant to hurt me. I didn't believe a word. I turned to the door and told them to leave. Neither of them moved at first, but then Mark slowly stood up and walked out without another word. Rachel followed, still crying. When the door closed, I sat at the table and let out a long breath. I didn't feel joy or sadness. Just quiet. I knew it was over. I cleaned up the dishes, threw away the broken glass, and went to bed without looking back. The next morning, the house was silent again, but this time it felt different. It felt clean, like the lies had finally been washed away. I knew the next step was leaving for good. I didn't see Mark or Rachel after that night. The house stayed empty for days, and I didn't miss them. I spent most of my time packing quietly, one box at a time. There was no reason to stay anymore. Every corner of that place reminded me of lies and pain. I wanted a fresh start where no one knew me, where no one saw me as the blind woman who had been betrayed. The lawyer called to tell me everything was moving smoothly. The divorce papers were ready, and all the documents were in my favor. Mark hadn't even tried to fight. Maybe he was too ashamed, or maybe he knew he didn't stand a chance after the evidence I had. I signed everything, sent the papers back, and didn't look at them again. It felt final, simple, and clean. I sold the house quickly. I didn't even go back to check after the sale. I only took what truly mattered: my parents' photos, my paints, a few clothes, and the small statue my mother gave me before she died. Everything else stayed behind. I didn't want anything that reminded me of Mark or Rachel. When I left, I drove for hours without a real destination. The sun was setting when I reached the coast. The sound of waves felt like a promise of peace. I rented a small house near the beach, old but quiet, with white walls and big windows. It wasn't much, but it felt right. I wanted silence, not memories. In the first few weeks, I didn't talk to anyone. I walked along the water every morning and painted in the afternoons. My eyes still hurt sometimes from the light, but I didn't mind. Seeing the ocean, the sky, and the people passing by made me feel alive again. I painted simple things: the horizon, a single boat, a woman standing on the sand looking at the sea. It was my way of letting the pain go. Sometimes, I thought about Mark and Rachel. I wondered if they stayed together or turned on each other after everything fell apart. But I never tried to find out. They were part of a chapter that had already closed. What mattered now was that I had survived. Months passed, and life began to feel normal. I learned to smile again, not the fake kind I used to show, but a real one. Daniel visited once and said I looked stronger. Maybe I was. He didn't ask much about what happened, and I was grateful for that. Some stories are better left in silence. One evening, I sat outside watching the sunset, the same way I had done as a child with my parents. The light spread across the water, soft and golden. I thought about everything I had lost, but also everything I had gained: freedom, peace, and the strength to start again. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending anymore. I could see clearly, and this time, the world felt safe. The days by the coast passed slowly and peacefully. I kept myself busy with small things, simple routines that gave me calm. Every morning, I opened the window and let the sunlight in. The air smelled like salt and freedom. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched people walking on the beach. They didn't know me, and I liked that. I was no longer someone's broken story. I was just a woman learning to live again. Painting became my way of healing. I painted the sea most days, sometimes calm, sometimes wild. The changing colors reminded me that nothing stays the same forever. At first, my hands shook when I held the brush, but soon they grew steady. Each painting felt like a step away from the darkness. I sold a few of them to a small gallery nearby. The woman who owned it told me my work had emotion. She didn't know how much truth was behind that word. Daniel visited a few times. He was proud of me and said he hadn't seen me smile like that in years. I told him I felt light again. We didn't talk about Mark or Rachel. There was no reason to. Their names had lost meaning. They were ghosts from another life, a life that ended the day I stopped pretending to be blind. I didn't want revenge anymore. I just wanted peace, and I had finally found it. One afternoon, while walking by the water, I saw a young couple holding hands, laughing without worry. For a moment, I thought about what I once had and how easily trust can be broken. But then I realized that losing them had given me something better. I had found myself. I no longer depended on anyone to feel safe or loved. That thought made me smile. In the evenings, I would sit outside with a blanket and listen to the sound of the waves. Sometimes, I closed my eyes and remembered the silence of my old life, the years I spent in the dark, trusting people who didn't deserve it. I wasn't angry anymore. I had forgiven, not for them, but for myself. Carrying hate would have kept me tied to the same pain. Months later, I visited my parents' graves for the first time since the surgery. I brought a painting of the ocean and placed it beside their headstone. I told them I was okay now. The wind blew softly, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I felt their peace around me. That night, I walked home under the moonlight. The world looked beautiful, gentle, and real. I thought about how far I had come from the woman who once hid behind blindness. Now, I didn't need to hide. I could see clearly, not just with my eyes, but with my heart. The past was behind me, and for the first time in years, I was free. The mornings near the sea were calm and full of light. I woke up early every day and watched the sky change from gray to gold. The sound of the waves was soft, like a promise that life could still be peaceful after everything I had been through. My small house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt safe. I finally had a place that belonged only to me. I started painting again, not for money or to forget, but because it made me feel alive. I painted the sky, the water, and the people walking by. Each painting showed a small part of how I felt inside, strong, quiet, and free. Some of the locals bought my work, but I never talked much about myself. I liked keeping my story private. It was enough that I knew what I had survived. Sometimes Daniel called to check on me. He always asked if I was happy. I told him yes, and it was true. He said I sounded different, lighter. I was. The anger and hurt had faded. Time didn't erase what happened, but it made it smaller. I could finally think of it without pain. I didn't need to look back anymore. One day, I met an older woman at the small cafe by the beach. She came there every morning to read. We started talking about art and life. She said something that stayed with me. When you survive heartbreak, you start to see beauty in quiet things. I knew exactly what she meant. I used to think love meant holding on, but now I understood it could also mean letting go. At night, I sometimes sat outside with a cup of tea and watched the stars. I thought about the years I lost in darkness, not just because I couldn't see, but because I trusted the wrong people. Now, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. The quiet no longer scared me. It felt like freedom. I learned to enjoy small things again: the smell of the ocean, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the sound of birds at dawn. Life didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be honest. I had spent years surrounded by lies, and now honesty felt like the greatest gift. One evening, while cleaning my studio, I found one of my old paintings from before the accident. It showed a woman standing alone on a cliff, looking at the horizon. I smiled because she looked exactly how I felt now, alone, but peaceful, watching the world with open eyes. I placed that painting by my window. Every morning when I saw it, I remembered everything I had overcome. I wasn't blind anymore, not in any way. I could see the truth, see beauty, and see myself clearly. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might find in the light.